it's day two of the vetting of President Akufo-Addo's nominees. We've seen a number of appointees appear before the Appointments Committee in Parliament, including Katie Hammond, who was before the committee. We've also seen the likes of the Minister of State at the Local Government Ministry, Obi Amwa Tekisten, and then Stephen Amwa also did. But what has been the process so far, and what's been the quality this time around of the vetting process? We've seen also some reforms and changes to the Appointments Committee. I want to bring in now Samuel Obeng, who's Executive Director for the Parliamentary Network Africa. Thank you for joining us, Sami. And it's been a very grilling moment for these nominees. Some of them have never appeared before the committee before, I suppose. And so it came with some shocks as well. And also the change in the composition of the Appointments Committee itself. But looking at the process so far, what's your impression of day two and i.e. day one as well, even when the process is started?
Well, I think that the Appointments Committee has realized that we are not in ordinary times, and very important moments in the life of a country requires that things are not done business as usual. And so we have seen some very interesting approach to the vetting process by the Appointments Committee this time around. That doesn't mean that they've not been doing some of these things in the past, but I have not followed 100% all of the vettings that have been done, but at least the bits and pieces excerpts that I have seen shows that the committee is minded about the fact that Ghanaians will need to take some of these things seriously, because the people of Ghana are actually looking at these things, and it does matter to them. Of course, the composition it's a matter that needed to happen anyways. Recall that the ranking member and deputy ranking member for the Appointments Committees have traditionally been the minority leader and the minority chief whip. And so considering that you have minority leadership changing, certainly new people occupying those roles will have to take their place on the Appointments Committee. And so that's how come that also happened.
Okay. But then let's talk about even some of the individuals who have appeared. Look at the likes of Katie Hammond, very experienced on the floor of the House. He calls himself the class prefect of the MPs, and yet his colleagues would not even spare him. Do you think that the House is becoming much more divided?
Well, while we were in school, we certainly were not sparing class prefects who sometimes did not behave as class prefects. If you are class prefect, there is a certain way that you're expected to, go about your work. If you do not, certainly you will not be spared the hardness from your colleagues. I really think that members of parliament certainly needed to send that right signal to colleagues that, look, we are one happy people in chamber. We go about our duties in a friendly manner and all of that. But if you are taking very serious, sensitive national positions, like a minister of state, take a minister who is going to handle matters relating to trade and industry, an economy that badly needs transformation in some of these areas. You certainly must not have a vetting that is a walk in the park. And you certainly must not come to the vetting with some of the attitudes that I think he showed, which were, in my opinion, uncalled for. Some of the words that he used, which of course the chairman, for example, had reason to make him withdraw. I think that the whole thing about, for example, Mr. Katie Hammond feeling that because this is a meeting of friends and colleagues, I can get away with everything and anything, was clearly dealt with by the committee to put things in proper perspective. And I was particularly excited about that.
And this unique phenomenon that we're seeing, the opposition party issuing a statement asking its members of parliament not to approve any of such nominees by the president. Have we seen this before? And is it right, first of all, is it permitted within the standing orders of Parliament or perhaps our laws to have a political party direct members of the appointments committee to reject a nominee?
Blessed, within the last 6 years at least, we have seen many times that this NDC party had, tried, put out communication, whether formally or informally, to their members of parliament on, especially appointments committee, on vetting of various ministerial nominees. You will recall that we had, many issues in the very first vetting that was held for the set of ministers under this president's regime when he took office in 2001 after the 2020 after the the first elections that brought President Akufo-Addo in
2016 you mean? Yes,
2016, so the vetting of 2017. Yes. We certainly saw some issues also from the very vetting after he won a second term. We've seen instances of members of the minority caucus threatening to resign from the committee, finger pointing, some statements from party members here and there and all. We've seen some of these things. But I think that, whenever these things happen, we are unable to call a spade, and we sometimes want to call it, a big spoon. Members of parliament have been elected to perform a very unique mandate, to represent the people of Ghana and making sure that they make the right decisions for and on behalf of the people of Ghana. Yes, political parties have interest in there because these people stood on their ticket. But I think that it is important that we get to that level where right-thinking members of parliament will make decisions, with the interest of the people that they serve and represent at heart, and not being asked to do some unblock, things. So that we all commended the NPP majority members who asked for the head of Mr. Foriata, for example. That is the same way that if we hear the NDC minority members say that, look, Your Excellency, Mr. President, we expect you to downsize, and for which reason there are certain nominees that we will not approve because we don't see how they add up to, the growth trajectory that we are charting, and we think that these things can be avoided. Yes, we'll welcome those. But I think that to try and put it, and you see, political parties must learn these. Sometimes these populist approach of trying to put things out and saying we are directing our members to do X, Y, and Z does not really send the right signal. And it sometimes, sets up these members of parliament to make them look like a group of people who could not have a mind of their own and cannot think for themselves. But these are hardworking members of parliament who are doing some amazing stuff. I think that in principle, some of us have called for the fact that parliamentarians should stop complaining about the large sizes of the president's government and rather take decisive actions when it is time for vetting. If we think that the president is appointing too many people, do not approve, some of the names that you think that, are not relevant. And these are the right signals that needs to be sent out. I think we can avoid, making parliament and parliamentarians look like a group of, for the want of a better word, stooges that, people can direct and move around outside of parliament. For us to let people realize that these are hardworking individuals who in their work in parliament are right thinking, can make right decisions, can gauge the mood of the people in the country, and that can inform the decisions they make on the floor of parliament.
Okay, Sami, just hold on for me. I want to bring in parliamentary correspondent Gugu Asante, monitoring the very last and some say perhaps the final appointment of President Akufo-Addo. We still have at least a few more months to the next general election, so you never know if you'll be making a new set of appointments. But anyway, Kweku, we're expecting the very last nominee to appear, Herbert Scrapper, correct?
No, the last vetting is expected to be Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam,
okay, right.
who has been appointed as the Minister of State at the Finance Ministry. Just before that vetting of Honorable Stephen Amoah ended, Dr. Tesla Tufosu, the minority leader and ranking member on that committee, said he has a number of questions that he wanted to reserve for the minister. He was not so satisfied with some of the answers that Dr. Stephen Amoah responded to in terms of the economy. You know that Dr. Stephen Amoah had been justifying the current state of the economy He said that just like the IMF boss said a couple of days ago, Ghana's economy is not struggling because of government's ineptitude or incompetence, but because of exogenous factors like the Ukraine war and also the COVID-19 that plagued the country some time back. And so he was putting that blame on those factors. The minority having been so keen on that. A number of questions, Blessed, has run through this vetting process so far. It is the minority's insistence that the president was overpopulating government and that he could do well and manage the economy with far less members in government than there are currently. Indeed, the questions went to Obi Amwa earlier today. It did go to Dr. Stephen Amwa as well. Their response were that, well, that is a question the president will be fit to answer, that as far as they are concerned, the president has appointed them in federals of a certain goal and they are ready to help. But if the minority think that the numbers are too much, the president is the one fit to answer that question. Already, the minority has said that none of these nominees is going to receive their support. And just gone by, the majority have addressed the news conference where they have been urging their colleagues on the minority side to cooperate and support them, approve these nominees. They say that this hardline stance that the NDC minority in parliament have taken will not help deepen parliamentary democracy. And so we've heard from the chief whip on the majority side, Frank Anodon, who said that his colleagues must put aside what the party, their NDC party has been directing them and cooperate. But so far, we haven't gotten an inkling from the minority leader, Dr. Kesela Tuforsen, if they are going to go against that decision by the party. They've already addressed the news conference saying that none of these persons are going to receive their cooperation. So far, some would say that this process has just been a mere formality as they insist that none of them will go far, especially now that we are waiting for the last person to appear before the committee.
If we have those addresses ready, we'll get that shortly and, of course, update our viewers on that as to what the demand of the majority side is now. But how about waiting for the process to finish, at least to see what the minority will do? Is it the case that the majority is running out of time, running out of patience?
Indeed, what we understand, normally when the vetting committee finishes any nominee, normally sit back and make a decision as to whether or not they are going to approve them or not. But because the minority have already gone ahead of time to say that these nominees aren't persons that are going to receive our vote, it means that it's going to be such a tough thing for them to crack. The appointment committee has 26 members, 13 on the majority side, 13 on the minority side. When a first vote is taken, the chairman does not vote. The chairman only has a casting vote. So if there's a vote on any nominee at the committee level, that nominee will lose. So far, any of the 6 nominees will be expected to lose that vote in the committee because the minority will get 13 votes if they are all present. The majority side will get 12. And then that will mean that a recommendation will be made to the floor not to approve these nominees before a vote will be taken. So it is clearly a cagey matter. What we understand is that there are a lot of back channel conversations happening currently on both sides of the house to try and reach some compromise. But this is some high level stakes because this is not just the minority who have taken this position. This is their political party that has asked them to take a certain position, to take a certain posture. And so it's a bit difficult for the new minority leadership who are also set to try and do something to announce their presence. So clearly, the majority side are trying to navigate this. Yesterday, the deputy majority leader, Alexander Martin, addressed media and said that the NDC stance was unconstitutional, had no position in law, and today the majority chief whip has also spoken. So we understand the back channel communications are still undergoing.
Okay, let's listen now to the majority chief whip, and then, okay, we'll get to that shortly. But Sammy Obeng, if you're with us, that's the situation in Parliament now, where, of course, the minority leader must be in a very difficult position. He's also serving on this committee, yet his party says, don't approve them.
Well, so I go back to the point that I made, earlier. There must always be justification and reasoning behind, why one cannot be approved or why one can be approved. Our constitution is very clear on what Parliament's role is when, appointments are made by, the president of the land for people to serve as ministers. These ministers must get the prior approval of Parliament, as indicated in our constitution. Quite apart from that, the constitution is also very clear on which groups of people can qualify to be ministers of state. They must either be members of Parliament or qualify to be elected as members of Parliament. There are certain things that they shouldn't have done to disqualify them here and there and all of that. And we see that very clearly in Article 78 of our Constitution. So these are the things that, every committee will be looking at. And it is on the basis of these things that a committee can say that, okay, person A is qualified, person B is not qualified, and not on mere political party sentiment. However, we have also maintained that parliamentarians or Parliament has a role to play in this whole conversation about downsizing of the government. Whereas Article 78(2) talks about the fact that the president shall appoint, such number of ministers of state as may be necessary for the efficient running of the state, Parliament also has a responsibility to ensure that certain things that are needless, certain things that serve as a good oversight on the executive branch will be enforced. And so I would rather want to see a minority that is coming out to say that, look, nominee X, Y, and Z, we do not think that that particular role is necessary now in the face of the current situation we find ourselves in, because that will be a duplication of the role. I had the vetting, for example, of the minister designate to the Minister of State designate to the local government ministry, when he was asked the question, what would be, his role? And, his answer was to the effect that he thinks that his role will be one step below the substantive minister, but he will get to understand his clear, line of duties, going forward, because there's been some of these ministers designate who have been appointed, in the past. These are the things that Parliament should be interrogating to know that exactly what are you going to do as a minister designate when there is a substantive minister, when there are a couple of deputy ministers. Can we use this as an opportunity to downsize, on government so that it sends the right signal? So for me, those are the areas I would rather have the minority look at, rather than saying that our party has directed us that we should do X, Y, and Z, and so we are doing that. And you see, when the minority has the temerity to do some of these things, which would help, and party comes out first to talk about unblock disqualification and blah, 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 it goes to rather take away the shine from the minority members of Parliament who will do some hard work, yet it would look as if they only kowtowed to a party directive and they are not people who have minds of their own. And that's not very good.
The whole debate about having too many ministers, the constitutional element comes up because a 60% retention for members of Parliament, that's the dictate of the Constitution. Is it time that we take a second look at that, try as much as possible to reform what it is that our laws are saying about it?
Well, like I said, 78(2) talks about the fact that His Excellency the President has the power to appoint, such number of ministers of state as may be necessary for the efficient running of the state. And of course, more than half of these must come from Parliament. We've had a certain number of ministers over the years. The question of whether there's been efficient running of the state is a question that still hangs in the balance, whose answer of efficiency is to be taken and what have you. But certainly, we cannot run a country in this time when the right signals will not be sent. I agree with the people who say that, look, it is very likely that, downsizing on a number of ministers may not necessarily, it's not going to overturn or change our economic fortunes, but it sends the right signals. It shows that, everybody is, sitting up and everybody is making a contribution to the necessary changes that needs to happen. And government must listen at this particular material moment. We have run this country at times when certain ministries that have been now fragmented into 2, 3, 4 different pieces had run as one. And these things are possible because they worked efficiently and effectively even during those times. And yes, our constitution and the issue of members of Parliament having to be the majority of ministers appointed must certainly come up for conversation. But that's part of the bigger constitutional reform conversation that certainly needs to continue aggressively in our country.
I'm grateful. Thanks for joining us, Samuel Obeng, Executive Director for the Parliamentary Network Africa.